I walked in and it hit me so hard that in that entire plane, I was the only person of color. And
Oh.
it was quite an interesting experience. You walk in and you look around and you got the smile on your face, and you suddenly, it hits you really hard.
Organizations say we are building equality policy, equity policies. I would say it is also important for creating a space where people can be themselves. When they be themselves, you're automatically creating an environment. You don't even need a policy, you're automatically creating an environment where they are feeling equal and they can be the way they are.
It's part of northern BC.
Okay.
So if you know Prince Rupert,
Yeah.
it's just a ferry ride from Prince Rupert. You can also fly direct from Vancouver to Haida Gwaii. It's like a 2.5 hour flight. And initially, when I saw the posting and it said Haida Gwaii, I was like, where is this? And I went and looked on the map and this tiny dot. And then I went and looked it up and I learned about the Haida and I was fascinated. And they have great pride in their culture, their traditions. They've been fighting for their lands and for their airspace and for their water. So I got quite intrigued and I moved to Haida Gwaii. So at BC India Business Network, a lot of the membership I've seen with educational institutions, they hire senior people specifically to take care of their Indigenous portfolio, but also to advise the president.
Yeah.
When I was at Simon Fraser University, the president, Dr. Joy Johnson, hired Chris Lewis from the Squamish Nation to be a special advisor. And now he is in a very senior role at the institution.
Wow.
Right? And you have many of those examples. So for me, it was always about how can I do a better job? How can I compete with myself to get better? And for me, it's really important that I learned something new today. And therefore, tomorrow, I know a little bit more and then probably do better in the job that I'm in.
And I would request experienced immigrants to not just mentor them, sponsor them, talk about them in different events, the events that you go to, especially introvert immigrants. I'm an extrovert. I put myself out there all the time. You're an extrovert. I have seen you do that all the time. Not many of them are extroverts. Not many of them like to be going to events and introducing themselves, be prepared with a pitch and be fancy about it. Hey there, podcast fans. How are you doing? I am Monisha and I'm back with another power packed episode here. So, today joining us is going to be Shobna Jaya Madhavan. But before we get into her introduction, I would like to let you know that we are available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. Please subscribe to us, do not forget. And also, we are gathered today in the city of Vancouver, which is the nation's traditional territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Salil Watut nations. And we would like to acknowledge our presence here. Thank you. So now let's get the party started. We have an amazing guest today, Shobna Jaya Madhavan. The camera will turn to her soon enough. She calls herself unapologetic optimist who believes in the strength of humanity. She is a first generation immigrant and she moved to Canada in 1995. And she's been here for almost 20 years. She loves connecting with different people in different organizations. The powerhouse of this woman was actually nominated BC Medal of Good Citizenship Award, and her work spans around engagement, public relations, child welfare, government relations, and much, much more. She is passionate about collaboration to make a positive community impact and economical impact. And that's what she's been doing since 2017. And 2017 to 2024, she also was the AVP of Simon Fraser University's External Relations team. And now she is the Chief Impact Officer for MSM Unify. We will get to know about it more. And Shobana's dedication just goes beyond her impressive career. I mean, come on, I have said a lot of things about her career, right? But it goes beyond an impressive career. She started volunteering when she was 16 and continued to do so for various causes. And today, she also volunteers as the president of BC India Business Network. And she serves on multiple boards and multiple committees, all focusing on making world a better place. So without further ado, let's welcome the ultimate superpowered human being, Shobna Jaya Madhavan.
Do what you gotta do.
Okay, all right. Hello, yes, I'm back, and I gave you an amazing introduction about this beautiful human being. This is Shobna Jaya Madhavan. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
Sometimes you try really hard to say and pronounce the name right, and you're always wrong. Turns out I got it right this time, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Monisha.
All right. So before I begin, I would like to give you a backstory. This podcast actually didn't start as a video podcast, and I did not have the confidence to look into the camera or look into the people's eyes when I'm speaking. So I wanted to try it out as a LinkedIn audio format, and that's how I knew Shobna. Christine is the person who introduced
Yes.
me and said, "You know what? You should interview her." By then, I had no idea what I was doing, but then you were in India at that time, and you graciously gave me time and said, yeah, yeah, of course, Monisha, let's figure it out. And that gave me confidence. Many such people gave me that confidence, and from LinkedIn audio it moved on to audio podcasting, and now today we are in video podcasting, looking into camera shamelessly and looking into people's eyes. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, amazing. Congratulations. What a journey it's been for you.
Yeah, I know. And I have some news as well, which I will tell you later. But yeah, it has been a journey. It has been a lot of learnings and experiences. How are you?
I'm doing great. I mean, it's beautiful summer here in Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's just wonderful. There's lots of good stuff happening.
Okay.
Always meeting great people like you. So yeah, no complaints.
I'm the great people.
Yeah, of course. Very inspiring, right? What
Thank
you've
you.
chosen to do with your life.
Thank you. Um, some guests actually like being prepared for conversations, and this is a very impromptu conversation. And will we have a flow? Honestly, I don't know. But however, we are going to have amazing conversations out there. So let me go back to before you were in Canada and before you were in your home country. Is it okay for you to share which part of the world you are from and where you grew up?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Malaysia, and when I was 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
I moved to India to go to boarding schools.
Okay.
So I started pretty young,
Mm-hmm.
learning to be independent, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and got the gift of education at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And grew up in South India, predominantly Tamil Nadu and Kerala.
Mm-hmm.
My ancestry is from Kerala.
Mm-hmm.
And then for my master's, I moved to Mumbai,
Mm-hmm.
and I did my MSW at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, just in Mumbai. And I've always loved to travel. I've always loved to meet people from different parts of the world
Mm-hmm.
and understand how different worldviews,
Mm-hmm.
exist or coexist.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to travel
Mm-hmm.
after my master's. So I moved back to Malaysia,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked and traveled quite a bit in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1995,
Mm-hmm.
I decided to move to Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and I came here as a landed immigrant
Okay.
in 1995 June.
Okay.
So
Almost 20
yeah,
years.
so it's been more than 30
30
years.
years. Oh,
More
my.
than 30 years.
Yeah.
And so, if someone says, where is home?
Uh-huh.
It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
But I would say at this point in my time, at 56, I would say India and Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. India and Canada. That's a beautiful way to say. 1995 is when my brother was born. Now it feels like, now I realize he is also 30 years old. It is amazing to see that somebody who has had multiple global experience and exposure moving into this country, Northern America. And what is the first thing that you experienced? What kind of differences? Obviously, you have traveled a lot, Southeast Asia and other parts. And when you moved to North America, what was the first thing? What is the first difference that you encountered?
So when I moved to North America, I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
So I was still quite young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed,
Mm-hmm.
and thanks to not having internet,
Oh,
cell
yeah.
phones,
Yeah.
social media,
Mm-hmm.
you sort of come in with a very naive understanding
Mm-hmm.
of immigration,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also just as you don't have too much good information,
Mm-hmm.
you also don't have bad information.
That is true.
So you kind of come with a bit of excitement and open-mindedness,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just more an adventure, and that's what it was for me.
Okay.
But the one thing that struck me
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit when I was transiting through California,
Mm-hmm.
got into the plane to come to Vancouver, it was an Air Canada flight.
Mm-hmm.
I walked in,
Uh-huh.
and it hit me so hard
Uh-huh.
that in that entire plane,
Mm-hmm.
I was the only person of color. And
Oh.
it was quite an interesting experience. You walk in and you look around and you got the smile on your face, and you suddenly it hits you really hard
Mm.
that there's really not one person
Mm.
who remotely looks like you. Not that it worried me or scared me, but I remember that quite vividly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went along, and I've always been extroverted, so it's easy for me to talk to people, start a conversation. And if people are unfriendly, it doesn't really faze me
Okay.
because,
Okay.
I have no control over what someone else chooses to do.
Yeah.
I have control over what I choose to do, so I just continue being my cheery self. And usually the conversation begins to happen over time. I don't give up.
This reminds me, because you said you were the only person of color in the flight. This reminds me when people from African continent move to Canadian country as a whole, irrespective of which part of Canada. I have heard number of people say, after I moved here, I have felt different. I have been made feel different. So, not that somebody is saying, hey, you are different, but in a way, when they move from Africa, of course, there are a lot of expats who live in Africa. There are different people of color. South Africa has generations of South Asian community living there. Nigeria has a lot of Europeans living there, expats living there, so many people. But then when you move to Canada, they see themselves as, oh, I am a small community of Africans now. I am different. I look different and I feel different and I make people feel different. So that is something that it reminds me when you said this. And have you ever made feel different, or have you felt different after you moved to Canada?
Yeah, I think that's a natural byproduct of choosing
Mm-hmm.
to be an immigrant,
Yeah.
right? And I don't necessarily. I think it also depends on how you see yourself,
Yeah.
right? And while I'm very proud of my Indian roots,
Mm-hmm.
very proud of my South Asian roots, and I do nothing to hide it.
Yeah.
Whether it's my name or whether it's wearing a bindi or
Yeah.
whether it's wearing ethnic clothes to very Western
Mm-hmm.
formal events, I've always sort of remained, Shobna,
Okay.
and because if you're not comfortable in your skin,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot show up in a good way in this world.
Yeah.
So, I've managed to figure out a way to do that and enjoy the experiences. I think it's while I'm very clear on my roots,
Mm-hmm.
because I love to travel, because I've always had friends from different cultures, continents. For my undergrad, I did philosophy, so I learned Eastern and Western philosophy at a very young age. I think sort of I have a very broad perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
I see more in common with people than different.
Okay.
So when I see someone who looks very different from me or comes from another part of the world I've never even visited, I don't my natural way of being in this world, I don't think immediately, oh, this person is very different. This person has come from, say, Europe. My first instinct is to say, this person is from another part of the world. I got to find out like where they're from and learn
Learn
more.
more
Yeah,
about, yeah.
so for me it's that curiosity that kicks in by default, and I think that's really helped me have a more positive than a negative experience.
Oh, yeah.
But also a sense of humor really helps. Like I've had a number of occasions where the most random folks would say something like, oh, and by the way, you speak good English,
Oh, yeah. I have experienced
right?
that too.
And
Yeah.
let's say the person is from a Western country. My instinct, because I do have a sense of humor, is to say, and you too.
Yeah, I have said that too.
Right?
So
So,
true.
so and it's not being mean or being disrespectful. I'm being honest. You
Yeah.
thought my English was okay. Well,
I also feel the same
I
way.
feel the same about you. So you kind of learn to, teach yourself to feel equal,
Mm-hmm.
not superior or inferior,
Yeah.
but just equal. And I think it's something one needs to be conscious of, one needs to practice every day when you look in the mirror. If you don't feel good about yourself and you don't respect yourself, you don't love yourself, you're not kind to yourself, you're going to get out in the world and that's what you're going to receive.
Wow. So, like she said, it is true, it is very conscious, and it's more of a habit to look at yourself positively and feel that you're not different and you're trying to be equal. When organizations say, I don't know how I jumped into organizations, but however, when organizations say we are building equality policy, equity policies. I would say it is also important for creating a space where people can be themselves. When they be themselves, you're automatically creating an environment. You don't even need a policy, you're automatically creating an environment where they are feeling equal and they can be the way they are, behave the way they are, positively, respectfully. But you can do that, and thank you so much for highlighting that.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Because we spoke about different cultures, this is a land of indigenous nations, right? Which is very important, and we have to talk about it. You said that you have interacted, you have worked with, you have, been part of different cultural conversations. What kind of cultural conversations or contributions have you had in the indigenous cultural space?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question. So when I came in 1995, like most immigrants, could not find a job, did a minimum wage job. And then in December of 1995 is when I got my first break in the BC government.
Oh,
So I joined BC government as a child protection social worker.
okay.
And within the first 2, 3 months, it hit me quite hard that Indigenous peoples and Indigenous children in particular are treated very, very poorly by the dominant system. And as an aftermath of colonization, Indigenous families, Indigenous communities were broken apart and their cultures were destroyed. Children were forcefully put into residential homes and they continue to pay the price for it. The child welfare system that I was part of in 1995 was a leftover from
Oh, okay.
colonization in some ways, right?
Okay.
It was a very Eurocentric model. So even though at that time only about 5% of the BC children were indigenous, they were more than 50% in the foster care system. So
Oh.
it was a very large percentage, which then proved the point that indigenous communities and leaders were making, which is racism
Yeah.
prevails.
Yeah.
We are being treated badly, and our ways, our realities are not being taken into account. The more I learned about it, the more troubled I became. And I spoke to my supervisor about it. She understood my concern, encouraged me to continue to try and work in the system. About 2 years into working as a social worker, I was doing some work with the Stolo Nation in Chilliwack area. I was helping them set up their first child welfare system.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
I confided in one of the indigenous leaders there that I'm thinking of leaving
Okay.
government and the ministry because I feel I'm part of the problem,
Okay.
not the solution. So the person responded and said, the very fact that you're concerned about it makes me feel you're the kind of person who should stay in the system because you have an ethical, moral compass, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be concerned. And she said, rather than leaving and running away from this reality, why don't you go and live and work in an indigenous community
Perfect.
and support indigenous peoples
Yeah.
to exert their rights and to build systems that they want?
Yeah.
That had such a profound impact on me. So I applied, packed my bags, and moved to a job in Haida.
Where is that?
So Haida is a dot, a small island on the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
It's part of northern BC.
Okay.
So if you know Prince Rupert,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's just a ferry ride from Prince Rupert. You can also fly direct from Vancouver to Haida. It's like a 2.5 hour flight. And initially, when I saw the posting and it said Haida, I was like, where is this? And I went and looked on the map and this tiny dot. And then I went and looked it up and I learned about the Haida and I was fascinated. And they have great pride in their culture, in their traditions. They've been fighting for their lands and for their airspace and for their water. So I got quite intrigued and I moved to Haida with the government and I lived and worked there for 2 years. That 2 years was the most profound, transformative 2 years for me as an immigrant. It taught me what it means
To
to
be.
be an immigrant, uninvited guest on these lands. It also taught me and gave me a pathway to support and be part of reconciliation in a very meaningful and authentic way. And those 2 years changed me as a person,
Yeah.
changed me as a professional. I got to work with the Haida. and I saw a different way of working. And then when I moved to the headquarters of Ministry for Children and Families, when I was a policy analyst, I was a manager, I was an executive director. In all these different roles, I carried that learning with me. So I would ask myself, okay, this policy, what would it mean for Indigenous peoples? This policy, how would it be implemented in a remote area like Haida Gwaii? So it just gave me a different set of eyes
Yeah.
to look at the world. And then I moved out of government after 20 years, came to Simon Fraser University, where that work and that passion I had was recognized. And the former president of SFU, Dr. Andrew Petter, when he initiated a reconciliation initiative, he asked me to co-lead it with the director of the Office of Aboriginal Peoples at SFU.
Wow.
So that has been a very important part of my life. And I got to work with a lot of Indigenous nations, understand what it means to work with and for Indigenous peoples.
Wow.
So yeah, it's I can go on for like 10 days about this. Yeah.
Very, very mind blowing. But as a follow up question, because out of curiosity, let's assume people, when you moved, what year was it to Haida
Haida Gwaii, yeah, I moved in 2002. Yeah, I was there
2002?
for 2 years, yes.
22 years, right? So today, the immigration system has changed a lot. Many immigrants have come in. Uh, Country per se has changed a lot. Reconciliation processes have changed a lot. Let's hope it is improving. So many things have changed. As today's immigrant who's landing new as a newcomer, how would you recommend? What would you recommend for people to learn more about indigenous cultures or how to contribute to their land as a new immigrant?
Thank you. You know, one of the biggest criticisms and gaps in the system is millions of people come from around the world to Canada, clueless
Yeah,
that they are coming into
unceded
unceded
territory.
lands.
Yeah.
And there is this huge dark history, in Canada with regards to Indigenous peoples
Yeah.
and their rights and the nation's obligations to them. Though we've come a long way, right? It's just a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
And I think because the immigration system is so disconnected from reconciliation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
People are brought in based on their skill sets
Yeah.
or the amount of money they can invest in Canada, or because they're in a place where there's war and then
Yeah.
they're able to come in as refugees. But there is nothing connecting an immigrant in a meaningful way to the history of Canada and their responsibility
Yeah.
towards reconciliation. So there's that massive gap. Indigenous peoples have talked about it, others have talked about it, and now I think for your citizenship test, for example, there's a little bit there. But there is nothing really asking an Indigenous, a immigrant or a refugee person to, right from day one, get involved
Yeah.
in the reconciliation work. So, one of the things that we can all do is whichever community we are part of or whichever organization we are part of is to understand the lands we are on,
Yeah.
is to understand the host nations,
Yeah.
and then to ask ourselves, is there something I can do here with and for the host nations?
Wow.
The other thing is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released a report. It's online. So if you just Google Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, all the information you need is in one place. And I think just the way we are learning languages, just the way
Yeah.
we're learning the etiquette in Canada, we're learning about festivals and norms and
Yeah.
foods.
Yeah.
I think one of our fundamental obligations is
Is
to
to.
learn about the history of colonization
Yeah.
and then the importance of reconciliation and be a meaningful contributor. There is enough trauma in Canada, enough harms have been done. We, as immigrants and newcomers, we should consciously try not to contribute to that.
Wow. Um, as an immigrant, many face racism. It is sad that uh, the people who are from this land are still facing racism on many accounts. And like you rightly said, uh, as a newcomer who has experienced the immigration system and the express entry system, I can say it has no connection. And just like any other newcomer, like you rightly said, I had no idea when I landed. For me, as a third person point of view, before coming in as an immigrant, this is a white nation, for my understanding. And I reached and I did all the research, I studied, I connected with people, I asked the right questions, I learned about the history, I learned about reconciliation, I learned about the horrifying things that has happened in the past, and how can you support in various ways. And this really helps, and I really hope someday IRCC includes understanding about truth and reconciliation and the history as part of the express entry system. I hope someday that happens, but this is a good point that we have
Yeah.
mentioned it.
And the other thing is that, I mean, immigrants, and this is being very generalized
Yeah,
here, right?
yeah,
Most immigrants come with a good deal of education
true.
or with resources. I mean, you'd rarely come across an immigrant who has come based on the point system or
Yeah.
whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or, who comes here and, does not have a place to stay
Yeah.
or does not have food to eat,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or, is absolutely like on the streets. It's very rare to find that.
Yeah.
For most part, immigrants come with resources. They find a job. It may not be the job they wanted,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they will find a job and then they
Mm.
start paying the bills.
Yeah.
But we do have thousands and thousands of indigenous peoples, even today,
Mm-hmm.
basically homeless in the streets of Vancouver. We have thousands and thousands of indigenous peoples, right, who do not have clean drinking water on their reserves, right? These are some harsh, painful realities of Canada, which have been acknowledged, apologies have been made, but things are changing very slowly. So the way I look at it is that, let's say tomorrow I started a business,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
One of the easy things to do almost immediately is to say, if I'm going to hire 10 people, I will make sure, right, a quarter of them are Indigenous peoples,
Perfect.
right?
Okay.
Or I have a lunch event I'm organizing for a couple of business folks. I will cater
Invite.
it. I
Yeah.
will cater from
Okay.
an
Okay.
Indigenous catering company.
Okay.
And there's
Okay.
many of them.
Okay.
If I'm a corporate organization and I have to give gifts for Christmas,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
I will buy gifts from a indigenous company that
Yeah.
does beautiful artwork,
Yeah.
and I will put my branding on there and
Mm.
I will give it. So there are many ways. So if you look at many institutions,
Mm-hmm.
they have procurement policies
Okay.
that clearly say that indigenous host nations
Mm-hmm.
should be invited
Mm-hmm.
to apply for that RFP,
Okay.
right? So there are many ways in which
Mm-hmm.
we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, for example,
Mm-hmm.
the company that I'm part of,
Mm-hmm.
MSM group of companies,
Mm-hmm.
one of the verticals is Innovec, which
Okay.
is a group of colleges
Mm-hmm.
here in Canada. So one of the conversations I'm having,
Mm-hmm.
right, with the founder and with my CEO
Mm-hmm.
is how can we, reach out to our host nations,
Mm-hmm.
let them know we're here,
Mm-hmm.
let them know we're in the business of education,
Mm-hmm.
and is there a way we can invite Indigenous students and make them feel welcome at the institutions, which they are more than welcome,
Mm-hmm.
but can we look at possibly scholarships,
Yeah.
tuition waivers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there are many institutions, for example, the larger institutions, colleges and universities. Kwantlen Polytechnic is a great
Mm.
example
Yeah.
where they did tuition waivers,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So all of us, within the small span of control we have
Yeah.
in our daily lives,
Mm-hmm.
we can do things, right,
Yeah.
which actually lead to economic reconciliation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's many ways we can reconcile,
Yeah.
right?
Very small steps lead to big impact. this
It
is
does.
this
It
is
does.
the simplest of ways that we can do. And just like you mentioned, there are also other organizations who have partnerships with indigenous nations, specifically the land that they are have their organizations in, mining organizations, even though they mine in, say example, northern BC, right? So they have their own mine sites in the indigenous land, and they have collective agreements with those indigenous peoples and say, hey, so many percentage of people, your employees should be from indigenous communities. It could be their specific highly populated community or surrounding communities. It is mandated, it is agreed that they are supposed to be hired. And something that I have realized is many organizations do hire. Even though they hire, they are hired in the most junior level, and they are not hired across levels, right? So when I say across levels, I have rarely found, rarely, when I say rarely, statistical improbability, I'm not saying it does not happen, right? Statistical improbability, I find executive directors who are indigenous peoples, or executive committees that are indigenous peoples, they call diversity, but then there is a clear lack of indigenous representation there. That is kind of very disappointing. When I see from immigrant lens, I always see, hey, you don't have an immigrant in your executive board, or you don't have people of color in your executive board. Immigrant people of color could be two different things, just so you know. And if there is not enough gender diversity, because there are more than two genders, let's be honest about it. From an indigenous lens, if I say, I also realized that you don't have indigenous representation in your leadership group, which is disappointing is not the right word. It is disrespectful to them, even, because it is their lands, you're operating on their lands. And sometimes, if you are not able to create a space in the leadership level, at least create committees where the committees can contribute to the leadership decision making, where you can have at least equitable policies from a person who can give indigenous point of view, and you can encourage that point of view. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the good thing is that, when I look at the last 30 plus years, the needle has definitely shifted, and it's shifting in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I can give some concrete examples because my last 7 years was with Simon Fraser University, so in the education space, and now with MSM, it's also in the education space. So I've been in that space. I'm also as the president of BC India
India.
Business Network. A lot of our members are educational institutions. So I'll give you an example. So BC India Business Network, a lot of our members in their institution, they do have senior people who are indigenous,
Perfect.
right? So one example I'll give you, Vancouver Community College, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Vancouver Community College hired a dean last year,
Yeah.
right? Responsible for the indigenous portfolio. Wonderful Squamish Nation member by the name of Jesse Williams. Right? Yeah. So at BC India Business Network, a lot of the membership I've seen with educational institutions, they hire senior people specifically to take care of the indigenous portfolio,
Yeah.
but also to advise the president.
Yeah.
When I was at Simon Fraser University, the president, Dr. Joy Johnson, hired Chris Lewis from the Squamish Nation to be a special advisor. And now he is in a very senior role at the institution.
Wow.
Right? And you have many of those examples, like with Capilano University, with Langara, with UBC. A lot of these folks actually do that. And then in corporate organizations, they usually have a director role. So if you look at, say, YBR,
Yeah,
right, they will
yeah,
have a senior person who is indigenous, who's in charge of the connection to indigenous communities, to make sure indigenous people are being hired, and there is some giving back significantly to those communities.
Yeah.
Even like the group that I'm with, MSM Group of Companies, Innovec, which is one of the verticals, has just put out a posting, and it's called Director for Indigenous Initiatives, and looking to hire a senior person as a director to help us with that portfolio. So I'm beginning to see that. But the one thing I want to point out, which I think is very important to do, it's very important that when we engage with indigenous peoples, indigenous leaders, and indigenous communities, that we go beyond asking for their advice,
Yeah. Yeah.
asking for information.
Yeah.
True reconciliation is when these individuals can be part of decision making.
Yeah. Perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I'm going to be having a major, consultation, and I'm inviting the indigenous person to do land acknowledgement and bless the event, that is very important,
It is.
and it's great that's being done. But then, if they're going to be leaving that meeting, where the rest of us are going to sit down, deliberate, make decisions, call for policy changes, but they've not been part of that conversation, that's not reconciliation. That is not the right approach. right?
Yeah.
So we've got to go beyond
Yeah.
what I call symbolic gestures
Yeah.
of reconciliation and seriously ask ourselves, in our daily lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives, in our organizations, how can we seriously create opportunities, spaces, and places for Indigenous peoples to share their wisdom and be part of decision making? And that's where true reconciliation comes about.
True. Start hiring more people in your leadership teams. If you haven't already, listen to this and please start hiring. This is absolutely true. And it makes a lot of equity sense in a way. And it is very important. Um, Saying thank you is not enough. Don't pay them by with gratitude. That's not the right way. They need to be paid the right way and involved in decision making. And I totally agree. We have spoken about a lot. We have spoken about how indigenous cultures, how you can contribute, how they can contribute, how to be equitable, how to be respectful, and a lot of that. Let's talk about the other side, your side, your immigrant experiences. You have spoken about, as an immigrant, how have you contributed and how you are actively contributing to indigenous peoples and communities. As an immigrant, what kind of immigrant experiences have you had over the years? What has stood out for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I came here in my late 20s, so I'm 56 now, so it's been over 30 years, right? And it's been an amazing journey for me, and I've reflected a lot on it because you meet people who have had a very positive experience, and you meet people who have had a terrible experience,
Yeah.
and then you get a chance to sort of compare notes and reflect on it. So I think for me, just personally, I think probably the reason it's been such a phenomenal positive experience is because what brought me to Canada was wanderlust,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? My deep desire to see the world and travel lots and meet people, eat different foods and listen to different types of music, that's what drove me to Canada. I was thinking of going to Australia, and then my brother, who was here, invited me to Canada. And I looked on the map. Australia was too close to India,
Oh, yeah,
whereas
it is.
Canada was really far.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
thought, if I go to Canada, which is really far, I get to see more places. I mean, it was that simple, for me. So I think just coming in, in that sort of adventure mode really helped. What I was unprepared for was not getting a job
Oh, yeah.
and not getting an interview call.
Yeah.
And that really broke my heart because I thought I had a good degree. I thought I had good some work experience. I spoke English, was reasonably, friendly. So what's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that no one even invited me for an interview was very difficult to swallow.
Yeah.
And I did go through a very difficult time where I was like, oh my God, what's happening? Did I make a mistake?
Yeah.
The usual dilemma we all have. But then I think beginning to volunteer right away
Yeah.
and not wait for a job that pays you, I think was the best thing I did because I've always volunteered from when I was 16. So getting my first volunteer job in Canada within days of coming here was a game changer, and it kept
Okay.
me very happy and sane. And then I think having the humility to say, you know what, no one's going to hire me as a social worker and pay me 40 or 50,000, which was what the
Well,
norm was
yeah.
those days.
Yeah.
But maybe I can just do a minimum wage job. And so I applied for a minimum wage job, and I started to work at Rogers Arena,
Yeah.
which was GM Place those days, as an usher, $7.50 an hour, which was a very difficult experience. But when I look back now, that taught me some very important lessons.
Yeah.
And it taught me the difficulties people go through, when they come into a foreign country. I think when I look back, the 20 years in government, 7 years in, Simon Fraser University, now moving to MSM as the Chief Impact Officer, I think there's two or three themes that emerge for me.
Okay.
The first and the most important is, honestly, I've never asked what Canada can do for me.
Oh, that's a very good point.
I've always asked, what can I do for Canada?
Yeah.
I think just flipping that question around fundamentally changed the way I operate, how I go about my life here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, it has always been about, okay, what's the problem I can help solve and be part of?
Yeah.
What's the group that could benefit from my experiences or my skill sets where in a pro bono capacity
Yeah.
I can actually give back, right? So when I look back at my 30 plus years in Canada, I've always volunteered.
Yeah.
I continue to volunteer, whether it's sitting on a board, whether it is mentoring folks, whether it is going and giving keynotes, whatever it be. You can show up in so many ways. So I
Or
think,
this podcast.
or this podcast. So I think for me, my conscious decision to focus on the giving rather than the extracting or the taking,
Yeah.
that has fundamentally changed my experience. And I'm so glad that I did it, kind of more subconsciously, I would say. The other one is not feeling entitled
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
has played a big part. Like by nature, I don't feel entitled, in my personal life or my professional life. So for me, it was always about how can I do a better job? How can I compete with myself to get better? And for me, it's really important that I learned something new today. And therefore, tomorrow, I know a little bit more and then probably do better in the job that I'm in. And it doesn't matter what the title is, right? You could be a volunteer, you could be a chief impact officer, you could be a mother. Doesn't matter what the title is. The question is, are you your best version when you are in that role? And if not, why?
Yeah.
What's stopping you from becoming the best version of yourself in that particular role? Right? And so I think it's just being more conscious, more intentional, more deliberate about how you go about life. And by nature I'm quite positive. I'm pretty laid back and go with the flow of life. But I do set very high expectations and standards for myself. And then I compete with myself and, keep driving myself to get better, learn something. Like right now, I'm in that phase where I'm learning all things disruptive technology, be it AI or be it blockchain or whatever, because that's where the world is going.
Yes.
And it does not really matter whether I like it or not. That's not the point. The point is our lives are immersed in technology.
Yeah, it
So
is.
if I want to be a successful change agent, if I don't know the basics of technology, I don't understand the pros and cons of it, how do I have an intelligent conversation,
Yeah.
leave, and then how do I actually go about touching people's lives?
Yeah.
But all of that is self-initiated. I can't expect someone else to do that learning. I can't expect someone else to take the trouble to understand where the world is going.
Yeah.
This is on me, right? So I depend on my two sons, who are my gurus, and they help me, figure things out, send me great resources, and then have the humility to say, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't understand this. And can you like talk to me and explain this to me as if I'm in kindergarten?
Yeah.
It's okay. Just because I'm an adult, it doesn't mean I know everything or I can know everything.
Yeah.
And the world is changing so fast and furiously by the minute.
Yeah.
I think we have to engage in cross mentoring. So I
Yeah.
mentor a lot of young people. A lot of young people mentor me. And so this mutual reciprocal learning, giving, caring, growing is just a beautiful thing. And it's been a big part of my Canadian experience. Yeah. And one last thing,
Oh, that sounds
is make friends with
Oh.
people from all over the world, learn about their worldviews, learn about their cultures, learn about their music, learn about their food. Just yesterday, I had the pleasure and the honor of being at the Independence Day celebration
Yeah.
of the Republic of Argentina. And I had a phenomenal experience. Be it the culture, be it the food, be it the speeches. Consul General Ricardo, who I greatly respect and admire, such a great diplomat. He comes into the community. He's at all events. And invites people, into his space, and gives you an ability to see how another country, how another culture, thinks and operates,
Yeah.
both here in Canada and globally. And I think that's another important part I feel we can all do. We all have our networks, we all have our jobs and our pro bono work that we do. All of that, why can't we share it with people who don't have access to it?
Yeah.
So I'm very open about it. If someone reaches out to me and says, "Hey, do you know someone, who does A, B, or C?" Usually there's somebody in my network that I will know, right? Whether I'm following them on LinkedIn or whether they work with me or whatever. And I always make that introduction. But I find sometimes people are very possessive
Yeah.
about their networks or their connections,
Yeah.
or amplifying good work. And I think it's really important to be generous with the gifts you've been blessed with, because none of us are an island of one,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what goes around will come around. And it's really important, I think, to remember that we're all part of the same web, and so if we don't keep it interconnected, and welcoming and safe for everybody in there, uh, then everybody stands to lose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that
Wow.
was a long answer.
No, that was a very, irrespective of whether it was long or not, it was very touching and it is very true. It now this feels like I'm reading a book or something, like listening to an audiobook or something, because this has so much knowledge and so much values that you are bringing in. We have spoken about a lot. I have asked a lot of questions. Now it's time for to flip the question, right? Flip the table. Oopsie. Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you have any questions for me, Shobna?
I do. I have lots, but I'm going to start with one or two.
Okay.
So, what what took you to podcasting?
What took me to podcasting? Oh, very simple question. There was this one time I met with this beautiful, talented, spirited woman called Christine Carino.
Ah, yes. The one and only Christine.
The one and only Christine. So I met her through ISS of BC, and ISS of BC was collecting testimonials about new immigrants and how ISS of BC has helped new immigrant journey. I was one of their clients, and I gave them a testimonial. Turns out my testimonial was good enough, and even government of BC took it up. It was submitted to government of BC as a case study, and they said, "Oh, your story is very inspiring." Honestly, it was not. Okay, let's be. I got a job which was very helpful. ISS of BC really helped. Career Paths program really helped, which is funded by IRCC. But turns out, my story was inspiring to a lot of people. And as a first generation immigrant, within 5 months, 4.5 months, I was able to land a six-figure job in
Amazing.
Canada. So, which was very inspiring to a lot of people. I still don't. For me, it is still a very small story, but then it was very inspiring to a lot of people, right? And I realized, oh my God, there are a lot of stories out there, not just somebody who got a job, right?
Yeah,
People are contributing in very significant ways, and those stories are not told to other immigrants.
absolutely.
When if my simple story was that impactful to a lot of people, there are so many, and from different cultures, from different places, from different parts of Canada, and that is not spoken about, and I wanted to be the person who gives people those stories, and that's what got me into podcasting. Did I
Amazing.
know what podcasting was? I had no idea. I was like, let's figure it out. So
No,
that's
that's
how.
amazing. And people don't realize the power of storytelling,
Yeah.
right? In fact, that's the only thing that's kept humanity, I think, going, right?
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not that there are no problems or there are no terrible incidents that happen all around the world, not just in Canada. And yes, we need to talk about it. We need to call out things that, are fundamentally, not okay in a society. But there are so many positive, inspiring, successful, stories which could help people see things from a slightly different perspective,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And just shift your eye a little bit, and just think about it a bit differently. So your contribution is tremendously valuable, and I'm so glad you're doing it. And I'm very honored to be on your podcast.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for that. One other question I have for you is, if you could ask one thing of immigrants who are, say, in their 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s, and they've lived here for more than 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So the more established, or people who've been here for a longer period of time. If there is one thing you could ask of them to do for newcomers, what would it be?
Sponsor them, mentor and sponsor them. especially people with decades experience or more and who are in their 50s or above 50s, and they are immigrants themselves. I would say it is, when newcomers come in, it might not be the same experience because immigration has changed a lot. Canada in itself has changed a lot. Processes has evolved, systems has evolved, policies has evolved, people have evolved. But something that remains is immigration is still immigration, and immigrants are still immigrants. You are going to be feeling different as soon as you land in Canada. It is going to take time for a new immigrant to learn that it is okay to feel equal, and it's a process, it takes time. And I would request experienced immigrants to not just mentor them, sponsor them, talk about them in different events, the events that you go to, especially introvert immigrants. I'm an extrovert, I put myself out there all the time. You're an extrovert, I have seen you do that all the time. Not many of them are extroverts, not many of them like to be going to events and introducing themselves, be prepared with a pitch and be fancy about it. No, including my husband, just so you know. And so many of them are introverts. So take an introvert immigrant or somebody whom you are willing to sponsor. When I say sponsor, not just monetary sponsorship, right? Talk about them in events. Hey, I know somebody who has the skill set. Hey, I know somebody who can contribute in your mission. Hey, I know somebody who is exactly what you're looking for. Be it small business owners, be it a job seeker, be it somebody who's a newcomer, always talk about them, always sponsor them. So that is something that I would always ask of experienced immigrants. Even though I am not experienced, I have started doing that too. People who land just new, who are new, really extremely new to Canada, I'll be like, okay, you know what, come with me to this event, I'll introduce you to people. So that's how I
Yeah. No,
recommend.
I'm so glad you brought it up because about a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
at BC India Business Network, with the support, of course, of the board and the founder, Dr. Vivek Sabkor,
Mm-hmm.
I started a monthly mixer,
Oh.
right? And it's once a month on the second Saturday
Mm-hmm.
at 10 o'clock at Sharavana Baba in Delta, the
Yeah.
South Indian restaurant. And it's like all welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And we just put the ticket out on Eventbrite,
Mm-hmm.
and people just come 40, 50, 60 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole purpose is to build community.
Perfect.
And what I'm finding over and over again
Mm-hmm.
is that there'll be 5 or 10 people who have only been here for
Mm-hmm.
3 months, 6 months, less than a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are lots of people who are much more,
Mm-hmm.
senior in terms of their years in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And then halfway through the event,
Mm-hmm.
they're like supporting each other, they're talking to
Oh,
each other.
perfect.
And it's just so wonderful to see that because there's so much we can give as people who've been here for longer.
Yeah.
It could be a referral, it could be a phone call, it could
Yeah.
be forwarding someone's resume to someone you know,
Yeah.
taking them to an event as your plus one, or
Yeah.
inviting them to speak at one of your events. So much we can do. And a lot of these things don't cost money.
Yeah. True. True
It's
that.
just good intentions
Yeah.
and paying it forward. And so when people say, oh, but what can I do? I don't have too many resources. I'm like, there's 100 things you can do without money,
Yeah, that is true. That
right?
is true.
But you need to have that willingness to be empathetic to someone else's pain, someone's difficult experiences, and realize how fortunate you are that you're past that point,
Yeah.
right? So, that I get tons of messages and people are asking me for an opinion or an idea or they want something. And always take the time to reply. Because to me, that might be question number 9 that day.
Yeah.
For that person,
That could be
that
the.
answer
Yeah.
could be life changing.
It could be.
And it's also you're telling them, I see you, I hear you, and I may not be able to change your world,
Yeah.
but I can do a little something for you,
That is true.
right? And that means a lot,
Yeah.
you know.
It does. It does mean a lot. Uh, like you rightly said, I have a couple of team members for the podcast. Um, it's not like I pay them because I am not earning revenue from it yet, right? But the reason why I took them on was nobody was giving them a chance, and they were people who wanted to learn. And like, if I am able to give you a chance to learn from through the process that we are doing, I am happy to give you that chance. They are volunteering, but just because they are volunteering, they are gaining the confidence, they are understanding how do you talk to in Canadian experience and work culture and all of that. That's a beautiful way. And there are many ways you can contribute to newcomers, and not many of them involve money at all. So let's do that, not for it.
Amazing.
Any other questions?
No, one last thing. I'm very passionate about mental health.
Yes.
So I cannot have a conversation without bringing that up. So I'm very curious, as a young person who is very busy, and you give a lot back to community, which is wonderful to see. What is the one thing you do consistently to stay well?
I work out a lot. Uh, I I have been a person who used to be dependent on external motivation a lot, but I am not anymore. I am
Wonderful.
dependent on discipline. Uh, I wake up by 5. I have a really long day. I go to bed early, 9 o'clock, but then I have a really long day. I'm occupied. I have tech to step. I have my podcast. I have my full time job. I have my pet. I'm also a wife, which is a lot of work in itself. So I work out a lot, and I talk about some if something is bothering me.
Wonderful.
I There used to be, I'm not a person who holds back. I'm okay to shamelessly say, hey, this is what I am going through. But when I was growing up back in India, that was not how it was. My household was not a emotionally conducive environment. Everything will be fine was the mental health strategy that we had, and that is it. That's it. We don't never spoke about mental health. We know everything will be fine, don't worry. That's it. It was. But over the years I've realized that mental health is very important, and I have started speaking about it, even if it's just a team member or somebody who is going through something. The first question is, are you okay? Do you need any support? How can I help you? Do you want me to sit and listen to you? Say whatever you want, no problem. I'll just sit beside you. I'll not judge. I'll not do anything. I'll not contribute in any way except for listening. Tell me, I'll listen to you. That is something that I've started doing very consciously, and I work out consciously. I work out a lot. I've
That's
been,
amazing. I
yeah,
mean, the two things you talked about, not letting things simmer and stew
yeah,
and go from a, mole to a mountain.
yeah.
That's like a great way to stay well, and being physically active and working out is so important. Yeah. And
Thank
good
you.
on you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Shobna, for coming today. I made her drive from quite a distance, so
No,
thank
no.
you for that.
No, such a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I wish you well.
Thank you. And just so you know, we are available on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify. Please subscribe to us. And we are also constantly sharing our short clips on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. Please do subscribe to us. Oh, and TikTok. Please do follow us there. If you have a question, please do share it. I am going to put across Shobna's LinkedIn profile on the description. Please do follow her. She does amazing work. She gives back to the community so much. She is one of my inspirations. I'm going to put my LinkedIn profile as well. If you have a story to tell, or if you can recommend somebody who has a story to tell, please do reach out to me. I'm happy to listen to you. And any questions at all, feel free to ask in the comment section. Thank you.
Thank you.